August 7th, 1944. Mortagne, Normandy, France. 6:47 a.m. The air was thick with mist and the metallic scent of diesel fumes. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commander of the 2nd Panzer Division, stood at his forward command post, a captured farmhouse reeking of stale tobacco and nervous sweat. He raised his 6x30 Zeiss binoculars to his eyes, the cold metal a stark contrast to his tense grip. Before him, stretching across the rolling bocage country of Normandy, was the iron fist of the German war machine. 175 tanks and armored vehicles of the Mortagne counteroffensive were ghosting through the fog, their engines a low, guttural growl that promised violence. Panzer IVs, sleek, deadly Panthers, and the indomitable Tigers, supported by legions of half-tracks and reconnaissance vehicles, were maneuvering into their assault positions. This was it. Hitler's final, desperate gamble to reverse the tide of the war in France. Operation Luttich, an attack ordered personally by the Führer against the strenuous advice of every single one of his field generals, had a single, audacious goal: to punch through the American lines at Mortagne, race to the coast at Avranches, and sever the lifeline of General Patton's Third Army, which was at that very moment threatening to encircle the entire German Seventh Army. Von Luttwitz, a soldier of the old school, knew in his bones that the plan was born of desperation, a madman's fantasy. But he was a professional. He would obey his orders to the letter. His division had been reinforced overnight. He now commanded 89 operational panzers, thousands of infantrymen, and had the support of 3 other panzer divisions. He glanced at his watch, the second hand sweeping with agonizing slowness. In 13 minutes, the coordinated assault would begin. The weather was his greatest, and perhaps only, ally. For the last 3 days, a dense, soupy morning fog had blanketed Normandy, clinging to the earth until 9 or 10 a.m. This fog had been a godsend, grounding the dreaded Allied J-bows, the fighter-bombers that had mercilessly savaged German columns for the past month. If the fog could just hold for another 3 hours, his panzers could reach Avranches before the Allied air forces could even react. But then something changed. Sound of a light breeze. Music shifts to a more ominous tone at 6:52 a.m., just 8 minutes before H hour. Von Luttwitz felt something on his cheek. It was a breeze, a gentle but persistent whisper from the west. The fog, his shield, began to stir. It swirled in lazy eddies, then began to shred, thinning into ghostly tendrils. In the span of 15 minutes, visibility exploded from a mere 200 yards to over a mile. A cold knot of dread tightened in von Luttwitz's stomach. He snatched the handset of his radio. "To all battalion commanders," he barked, his voice tight with urgency, "proceed with extreme caution. Maintain maximum dispersal. Enemy aviation may be active." But it was already too late. 115 miles away, at Boxted Air Base in England, the ground trembled. The pilots of the legendary 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolfpack, were already strapped into the cockpits of their Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. The massive 2,600 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines were roaring to life, the air filling with a thunderous symphony of American industrial might. First Lieutenant John Baldwin, leader of Yellow Section, had been shaken awake at 0530 with the news. "Major German counteroffensive at Mortagne. We need every jug in the air as soon as the weather clears." Baldwin had flown 47 combat missions in the last 2 months. He knew the job. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't a nimble dogfighter like a Spitfire or a Mustang. The jug was a beast of burden, a 7-ton flying battering ram designed for one brutal task: hunting and destroying armored targets on the ground. His Thunderbolt, loaded for bear, was a testament to that purpose. Slung beneath its wings were 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, or VARs. Each rocket carried a 45-pound high-explosive warhead capable of punching through inches of steel armor. Complementing this payload were 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, a wall of lead that could shred anything less than a heavy tank. The pilots had a grim saying about the VARs. The impact is a 6-inch naval shell. The accuracy is closing your eyes and praying. It was no joke. The rockets were notoriously inaccurate. At a typical firing range of 1,000 yards, they could easily miss the aim point by 50 yards or more. Most pilots considered a direct hit on a single tank to be more a matter of divine intervention than skill. But what the rockets lacked in precision, they more than made up for with sheer, terrifying firepower and the psychological shock they inflicted on the enemy. Narrator's voice becomes more engaging, directly addressing the audience. If you want to see just how this American brute force innovation changed close air support forever, make sure you obliterate that like button. It really helps us share more verified stories of military history. And if you're not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Join the ranks. Sound of control tower chatter, then engines at full power. At 7:05 a.m., the tower crackled to life, with the words Baldwin had been waiting for. All Wolfpack flights, you are cleared for takeoff. Target coordinates transmitted. Over 100 enemy armored vehicles reported in the Mortain area. Priority is maximum destruction. Weapons free. Baldwin shoved the throttle forward. The double Wasp engine screamed, and the heavy jugs surged down the runway, lifting into the now clear morning air. Behind him, 15 other Thunderbolts from his squadron followed in rapid succession. And all along the southern coast of England, it was the same story. Dozens of other squadrons were scrambling. The 4th Fighter Group, the 354th, the 365th. The largest concentration of American and British fighter bombers ever unleashed against a single target was converging on one small patch of the Normandy map. Flight time from England to the target area, 22 minutes. Music swells, sound of high-altitude wind. At 7:27 a.m., Baldwin crossed the French coast and dropped his altitude to 4,000 feet. Below him, the Normandy battlefield spread out like a torn and bloodied map. Fields scarred by shell craters, ancient hedgerows providing perfect cover, obliterated villages, and winding country roads. And on those roads, tanks. Dozens, scores of German tanks, moving west like a steel river. Yellow leader to yellow section. Baldwin's voice was calm, professional, cutting through the static. Tally-ho. Enemy armor, 2 o'clock, distance 3,000 yards. Attack formation. Going in now. He pushed the jug's nose down. The airspeed indicator needle climbed past 300 miles per hour, 350, then nudged 400. The German tanks swelled in his gun sight. He could clearly make out a Panther with its long, high-velocity cannon, 2 smaller Panzer IVs, and an unmistakable, blocky Tiger, its massive 88mm gun a clear and present danger. At an altitude of 3,000 feet and a horizontal distance of about a mile, Baldwin armed the VARs and placed the glowing of his gun sight slightly above the lead Tiger. The rockets were unguided, essentially 6-foot-long steel pipes packed with solid propellant. Once fired, they accelerated to over 1,000 miles per hour in a second and a half, following an erratic ballistic path influenced by wind, the plane's speed, the angle of the dive, and sheer, dumb luck. But Baldwin had learned the tricks over 47 missions. He held the dive at a steady 30 degrees, speed at exactly 380 miles per hour, and planned his release for between 800 and 1,000 yards. He compensated for the rocket's drop by aiming high and decided to fire in pairs to saturate a larger area. At 900 yards, he squeezed the trigger. Sound of rockets firing. A sharp whoosh, 2 VARs detached from the rails under his right wing with a sharp hiss, streaking towards the ground, leaving trails of thick, white smoke. 2 seconds later, he fired another pair from his left wing. Immediately, he hauled back on the stick, pulling the heavy fighter into a steep climb to evade the inevitable anti-aircraft fire. The G-forces crushed him into a seat. He craned his neck, looking back over his shoulder. The first rocket slammed into the earth 10 yards in front of the Tiger, erupting in a geyser of dirt and debris. The second hit the ground between the Tiger and a Panzer IV, carving a crater 6 feet wide. The third overshot the tanks completely and detonated in a hedgerow 30 yards beyond. The fourth rocket was a different story. It struck the Tiger's frontal glacis plate, a direct hit. The 45-pound warhead detonated against 4 inches of hardened Krupp steel with a brilliant flash that Baldwin could see clearly from 2,000 feet. An orange fireball, followed by a plume of dense black smoke. But the Tiger kept moving. The 4-inch frontal armor was simply too thick. The rocket had carved a deep gouge and likely concussed the crew, but it hadn't penetrated. Baldwin swore into his oxygen mask. A direct hit, and the damn thing was still running. But then, the sky fell in. The other 3 thunderbolts of his section dove in seconds after him, each unleashing their full payloads in rapid succession. Dozens of rockets rained down on the tightly packed German tank formation in the space of 10 seconds. Cut to ground-level perspective. Muffled sounds, ringing in the ears. From the ground, the German perspective was one of pure, unadulterated terror. Obersturmführer Klaus Berman, commander of the Tiger that had just shrugged off the direct hit, was still trying to clear the ringing from his ears when he heard the high-pitched shriek of more incoming rockets. His loader screamed over the intercom, "More J-bows." 3 o'clock. Berman peered through his periscope and saw a sight that would be seared into his memory forever. The sky was filled with white smoke trails, all converging on his position like the fingers of a skeletal hand. "Everybody out," he roared. "Bail out. Now." The crew didn't need to be told twice. The driver was already wrenching his hatch open. The gunner threw himself out of the turret. The loader shoved Berman out ahead of him. They scrambled from the steel beast and sprinted for a ditch 20 yards away. 3 seconds later, 2 VARs struck the Tiger almost simultaneously. One hit the engine deck at the rear, punching through the thinner 1-inch armor and detonating inside the engine compartment. The other slammed into the right track, shredding it instantly. The Tiger, immobilized and burning furiously, was now just 60 tons of smoldering scrap metal. Music becomes a chaotic, percussive symphony of destruction. But the attack had only just begun. From his command post, von Luttwitz watched in utter horror as the sky above his division filled with thunderbolts and typhoons. It wasn't 4 or 5 planes, it was dozens, then hundreds. They flew in disciplined 4-ship formations, attacking in continuous, rolling waves. Each wave unleashed a salvo of rockets and cannon fire, climbed, circled, and came back for another pass. Later estimates would calculate that between 7:27 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. that day, over 2,000 rockets were fired at the German forces in the Mortain area. 2,000 rockets. Nearly 50 tons of high explosives raining from the heavens in 7 hours. The effect wasn't just physical, it was psychological. It was soul-shattering. German soldiers who survived described the experience as hell on earth. The piercing whistle of the approaching rockets, the deafening explosions that shook the very ground, the smoke trails crisscrossing the sky, the absolute impossibility of predicting where the next strike would land. There was no shelter, no escape, only the blind, terrifying lottery of chance. Tank crews, their nerve broken, abandoned their perfectly functional vehicles and fled for the woods. Half-track drivers left their vehicles in the middle of the road and scrambled for any available cover. Platoon commanders lost all radio contact with their subordinates. Entire battalions disintegrated as organized fighting units. Von Luttwitz tried desperately to rally his men, ordering the remaining panzers to disperse and seek cover under trees. He pleaded for urgent anti-aircraft support, but the response was brutal. The Luftwaffe could no longer provide effective air cover over Normandy. Their fighters were being systematically annihilated by Allied Spitfires, Mustangs, and Thunderbolts. At 9:15 a.m., less than 2 hours into the aerial onslaught, von Luttwitz transmitted a coded message to the XLVI Panzer Corps headquarters. Enemy air attack of unprecedented intensity. Severe losses in vehicles and personnel. Requesting permission to withdraw to defensive positions. The reply came directly from the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. Denied. The Führer orders the attack to continue, regardless of losses. Von Leutwitz stared at the message for a long moment, the paper trembling in his hand. Then he folded it, put it in his pocket, and went back to trying to save what was left of his division. By 2:30 p.m., when the last of the fighter-bombers returned to their bases in England to rearm and refuel, the battlefield around Mortain looked like a graveyard of steel. The final tally was devastating for the Germans. 175 armored vehicles were confirmed destroyed or abandoned. 89 panzers, including the most feared Tigers and Panthers, were knocked out. 67 half-tracks and transport vehicles were burning wrecks. The 2nd Panzer Division had been reduced from an effective fighting force to a fragmented collection of shell-shock survivors with no offensive capability. But the real story of the Mortain attack is more complex than the numbers suggest. After the war, Allied operational researchers conducted an exhaustive analysis of the Mortain battlefield to determine the true effectiveness of the aircraft rockets. They examined the wreckage of every single German vehicle, looking for the telltale evidence of direct rocket hits. The results were staggering. Of the 175 German vehicles claimed as destroyed by the fighter bombers, only 9 showed conclusive evidence of being knocked out by direct rocket impacts. Just 9. Barely 5% of the total. So, what destroyed the other 166 vehicles? The answer reveals a deeper truth about modern warfare. Thoughtful, analytical music begins sometimes. The psychological effect of a weapon is far more devastating than its direct physical impact. The vast majority of German vehicles at Mortain were abandoned by their crews, not destroyed by direct hits. The crews, utterly terrified by the relentless bombardment, fled their fully operational vehicles and left them sitting on the roads. Many of these abandoned machines were later picked off by American artillery or simply ran out of fuel as German supply columns were unable to reach them. Other vehicles were damaged by near misses that shredded tracks, destroyed optics, or disabled communications, rendering them combat ineffective. But the end result was the same. 175 armored vehicles were wiped off the map. Hitler's counteroffensive had collapsed. His last chance to change the course of the war in France was annihilated from the air. Were the HVAR rockets the miracle weapon that Allied propaganda claimed? Not exactly. Were they brutally effective in achieving their military objective? Absolutely. The rocket attacks represented a new paradigm in close air support, massive area of effect saturation combined with overwhelming psychological shock. You didn't need to be precise if you could fire enough rockets to blanket a wide area and terrify the enemy into paralysis. It was the military doctrine of quantity has a quality all its own applied to aerial weaponry. And it worked. After Mortain, the German High Command became increasingly reluctant to concentrate its panzer forces for large-scale counteroffensives, knowing that any such concentration would become an immediate magnet for swarms of rocket-firing thunderbolts and typhoons. The panzer divisions became smaller, more dispersed, and more cautious. They operated mainly at night, avoiding open country during the day. Their offensive power was drastically curtailed. The Ardennes offensive in December of 1944 was only possible because Hitler gambled everything on several days of bad weather that would keep the Allied air forces on the ground. When the skies cleared on December 23rd, the fighter-bombers massacred the German panzer columns exactly as they had at Mortain. General Heinrich von Leutwitz survived Mortain. He continued to command panzer units until the end of the war. In his post-war memoirs, he wrote extensively about August 7, 1944, describing it as the day I knew with absolute certainty that we had lost the war. It wasn't the tactical defeat itself that convinced him. The Wehrmacht had suffered defeats before and recovered. It was the stark realization that the enemy now possessed the ability to concentrate overwhelming firepower on any point of the battlefield in a matter of minutes, a power that rendered German tactical prowess and superior armor almost irrelevant. It was the understanding that Allied air supremacy was so complete that the war had fundamentally changed. Von Leutwitz wrote, "I watched as the sky over my division grew dark with enemy aircraft, like a plague of locusts. I watched as 175 vehicles for which we had fought and bled were destroyed or abandoned in 7 hours. And I understood that no matter how brave our soldiers, how superior our tanks, or how clever our tactics, the enemy could simply bury us under a mountain of high explosives dropped from the sky. It was a lesson the German army would learn again and again for the next 9 months, until the very end of the war. In an age of total air supremacy, ground formations without effective air cover were not armies. They were targets. First Lieutenant John Baldwin flew 63 more missions before the war ended, many of them firing rockets at German ground targets. He survived the war and lived until 2003, passing away at the age of 82. In an interview in 1997, he was asked about the Mortain mission. He replied, "We were young, we were scared, and we had no idea how important those attacks were at the time. We were just doing our job. Flying low, fire your rockets, pray the flak doesn't get you, and go home to do it all again the next day." It was only after the war that I really understood we had taken part in one of the turning points of the Normandy campaign. He was asked if the rockets were really as effective as claimed. Baldwin smiled a wry, knowing smile. "They were horribly inaccurate," he said. "You'd fire 10 rockets hoping maybe 1 or 2 would get close to the target. But there were so many of us, firing so many rockets, that in the end, it didn't matter. It was like fishing with dynamite. You don't need precision when you use enough explosive." What do you think of this incredible story? Do you believe the psychological impact of a weapon can be more important than its physical precision? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because every week we bring you more verified, fascinating stories of the weapons and tactics that changed the course of history.